Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Thank you for your continued support. Let's find out. Did Tracy really do the right thing by telling Anita, or was she driven by personal jealousy and resentment? If Tracy's suspicions are wrong, is she destroying a marriage at its most fragile moment? Does Tracy have evidence of Vernon and Sharon's affair? Who will she confront first, Vernon, Sharon, or Anita? Tracy didn't enter Dupree's house as a messenger. She entered like a blade sharpened by weeks of observation, nights of questioning, and countless moments pushed to the sidelines by a nagging feeling that she was seeing what others deliberately chose not to see. In Fairmont Crest, where every smile was valued and every greeting carried a measure of status, the truth was rarely spoken directly. But Tracy decided to do what she called the right thing to do and what many others would call reckless, to bring her suspicions to the point where they could explode most violently, right in front of Anita. She believed she was saving a woman from being deceived. But deep down, Tracy also knew another part was guiding her, a part fueled by resentment at Vernon's constant reverence, while she remained outside the gates of their secrets, forced to believe in their apparent perfection as an unwritten rule. Tracy had seen Vernon and Sharon too many times in situations that were unnecessary, enough to be called mere social interaction. Texts vanished as quickly as cigarette butts. Calls were abruptly cut short when she unexpectedly appeared. On one rare occasion, Tracy caught Vernon standing in a dark corner of a party, his eyes not on Anita but on Sharon, as if they were sharing a silent language. All those fragments weren't enough to form evidence, but enough to create a story in Tracy's head, a story that was becoming increasingly plausible in the most dangerous way. It made her feel like she was the only one sane enough to expose the illusion. She didn't foresee that the evening she chose to rescue Anita would be the evening Anita was saving herself in a different way. Not from a cheating husband, but from the darkness of a disease silently consuming her. When Tracy entered, she immediately sensed an unusual heaviness in the Dupree house, as if the lights had been dimmed. Anita no longer possessed her usual invincible demeanor, no longer the image of a woman who could command an entire room with her silence. A subtle weariness flickered in her eyes, something outsiders often overlooked because they were more accustomed to seeing Anita as a symbol than as a person. Vernon stood nearby, his body slightly tense, as if he had just received an invisible blow. And then Anita spoke the words no one in Fairmont Crest wanted to hear, for it was not only bad news, but also a reminder that all privilege is powerless against fate. Anita had cancer. From that moment, the space seemed to split into two layers of reality. One layer was the world of fame, power, parties, and gossip. The other was the naked world where a woman faced death slowly and cruelly. Vernon was so stunned that for a few seconds he could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heart. He had only one thought, one most instinctive one. He had to be with Anita, to be her support, to turn his fear into action, to do everything to keep her in his life. But Tracy arrived to ignite the remaining layer of reality. The cancer diagnosis didn't make her forget what she carried. On the contrary, it made her decision both urgent and cruel. Because in Tracy's mind, if Anita was sick, Anita had an even greater right to know the truth than ever before. She believed she was giving Anita control. She didn't see that she was also taking away the only thing that could help Anita stand firm, the belief that her marriage was a safe haven. Tracy spoke directly. No beating around the bush. There was no softness to lessen the force. The words Vernon and Sharon were placed side by side in a way that instantly chilled everyone in the room. Anita didn't scream. The pain didn't erupt into a sound. It froze into a thin layer of ice covering her face. For a moment, Anita looked at Tracy as if she were a stranger who had intruded into her most private space. Then Anita turned to Vernon, her eyes a silent question. Was it true? Vernon, still reeling from the cancer, was pulled out of his caring instincts and plunged straight into a survival mode of honor. There was no time to choose his words, no space to embrace Anita, and say everything would be all right. Because if he embraced her, people would call it acting. If he remained silent, people would call it an admission. Vernon said there was no infidelity. But as he spoke, he also realized the trap of suspicion. Every denial sounded like a plea for belief. The more he tried to explain, the more he inadvertently suggested there was something to be explained. Anita, having just confessed her illness, was forced to doubt at her weakest moment. Cancer suddenly became a quantifiable pain, something that could be discussed with a doctor and for which a treatment plan could be developed. But doubt has no formula. It spreads like poison, seeping into every word, every movement, turning every word of comfort into a question and every silence into a crime. Tracy stood there, her sense of victory as fragile as a thread. Part of her was pleased to have shattered Dupree's perfection, to have proven that she, too, could influence them, could force them to look at what they wanted to hide. But another part began to tremble, uncomfortably, as she saw Anita's eyes darken not in a way that resembled anger, but rather collapse. Tracy wondered, had she just saved her or destroyed her? The question wasn't strong enough to make Tracy apologize immediately, for her pride still stood against her compassion. But it was strong enough to make her realize that, whether Vernon was innocent or not, she had chosen the cruelest moment. Vernon, meanwhile, was cornered in a rare situation. He couldn't protect both truth and peace at the same time. He had a connection to Sharon, yes, but not the kind Tracy had portrayed. It belonged to the past, a past he had locked away, believing that silence was protecting his family. Vernon understood the rules of Fairmont Crest. Secrets weren't always a crime, sometimes a strategy. But he forgot that strategy only works when no one touches it. Sharon wasn't his mistress, but her presence in the murky areas of Vernon's life always created a scent of scandal. And that scent, once it reached people's noses, would become truth, even without evidence. Vernon maintained a secret relationship with Sharon because he owed her something he couldn't say. A debt not related to feelings, but to something more dangerous. Honor, power, and an old mistake that could bring down the entire Dupree family if brought to light. Perhaps Sharon once held information that could destroy Vernon when he was at his peak. Perhaps she once saved him from a legal or political mistake by silently bearing part of the consequences. And perhaps Sharon, due to her own shame, fearing being seen as weak, chose to remain in the shadows rather than accept public thanks. In their world, help is never free. It becomes a binding rope. Vernon thought he controlled that rope with his discretion. He didn't think it would become a noose. Sharon also had reasons for accepting the role of the woman under suspicion. If she spoke up too soon, she would draw herself into the light, and that light would expose what she was hiding. Sharon was concealing something that made her willing to suffer the consequences, perhaps a past event that, if revealed, would cost her not only face, but everything. Perhaps Sharon had made a mistake, stumbled, or done something against the standards of Fairmont Crest, and Vernon was the only one who knew. Or, conversely, Vernon was the only one Sharon could cling to keep that secret from becoming a weapon in someone else's hands. So Sharon chose silence, chose to let people think badly of her, because sometimes bad reputation is more bearable than the truth. Meanwhile, Anita was torn between two pains, and the cruelest thing was that she didn't know which pain to strike first. The illness weakened her physically, but the suspicion weakened her mentally. Anita wasn't just afraid of dying. She was afraid of dying in a state of being deceived. She feared that the years she had spent building a family, protecting Dupree's image, sacrificing for Vernon, would ultimately only result in a mocking truth behind her back. And even though Anita had no proof, the mere thought of it was enough to make her feel betrayed even before the betrayal occurred. In Fairmont Crest, a woman's honor lay not only in herself, but also in how she was perceived. Anita understood this better than anyone, so the suspicion became a saw cutting into her self-respect. Tracy, after the initial shock, began to realize she had created a chain reaction she couldn't control. She wondered whether she should confront Vernon or Sharon. If she confronted Vernon, she would see him with her own eyes, hear his story, and gauge its veracity. But confronting Vernon also meant putting herself in a confrontation with a powerful man, someone who could make Tracy out to be a slanderer if things weren't true. If she confronted Sharon, Tracy would be attacking her imaginary target, the woman on the fringes, the suspected saboteur. But Sharon was the kind of person who could turn the attack into a counterweapon. Sharon could cry, could play the victim, could make Tracy look like a jealous madwoman. And Tracy wasn't sure what would enrage her more: the possibility of Vernon's betrayal, or the possibility that Sharon was clever enough to make people pity her. In that tense situation, Tracy chose the most dangerous path, confronting Vernon first, because she wanted to see a crack in his face. She wanted to see him lose control. She wanted to hear him reveal his weaknesses. And as she predicted, Vernon was no longer calm enough for a man facing two disasters at once. When Tracy pressed him, he reacted with long-suppressed anger, an anger not only directed at Tracy but at fate itself. Why? At the very moment Anita was ill. Was he being forced to explain a crime he hadn't committed, according to Tracy's perception? That anger made Vernon speak faster, harder, and that made him even more suspicious in the eyes of those who were already inclined to believe the scandal. And because Fairmont Crest had no walls thick enough to keep it a secret, the argument didn't remain confined to a closed room. A third person overheard: Nicole. Nicole appeared like a cold wind sweeping through the hallway, carrying with her the instinct to protect her family and the personal wounds that had once made her lose faith in perfection. Nicole didn't hear the whole thing, only fragments: Sharon's name, Tracy's sharp, knife-like voice, Vernon's strained, secretive tone. For Nicole, that was enough for her brain to piece together a picture. And that picture was dangerous because it touched upon Nicole's deepest fear: that the Dupree family was rotting from within, that secrets would kill them faster than any external enemy. Nicole couldn't remain indifferent knowing her mother was ill and her father was accused of adultery. She was angry at Tracy for choosing such a cruel time, and angry at Vernon because if he was truly innocent, why was everything so ambiguous that others could fabricate a story? Nicole understood the nature of power. It wasn't just about what you did, but also about what others believed you did. And right now, their family was losing the battle of trust. Nicole began to observe Vernon in ways she had never seen before, no longer as a father, but as a man who could be two-faced. She observed Anita in a more heartbreaking way, no longer as a symbol, but as a woman who was ill but still struggling against humiliation. The pressure was driving Vernon into a corner where words were no longer an option. He could swear, he could get angry, he could recount details of his past with Sharon, but every detail would only make people think something did happen. If he said Sharon had helped him, people would ask what kind of help. If he said it was a secret, people would think it was a secret affair. And at that moment, Anita didn't need more complicated information. Anita needed a sense of security. But that security had been shattered by Tracy. Vernon was forced to choose a different, more ruthless way to prove his point, bringing Anita as close to the truth as possible, even if it meant exposing Sharon. He knew that exposing Sharon would drive her to despair, and a desperate Sharon could react in two ways: defending Vernon because of their past grievances, or saving herself by revealing everything. Sharon, if cornered, could become an even bigger trigger than the infidelity scandal, because what she was hiding might involve power, past mistakes, a dark stain that Vernon had kept secret not out of fear of shame, but out of fear of destruction. As for Tracy, she faced consequences she didn't anticipate. If her suspicions were wrong, she would not only destroy a marriage, but also a woman battling illness. But if her suspicions were right, Tracy would become the one who forced Anita to confront betrayal at her weakest moment. Right or wrong, Tracy would make herself the scapegoat. And that made Tracy both afraid and stubborn. She was afraid because she saw Anita's eyes becoming increasingly distant. She was stubborn because she couldn't bear the thought of becoming senselessly cruel. She began to convince herself that she had to go all the way, to pull Sharon out, to force Vernon to explain, so that at least the pain she caused would have a reason. Meanwhile, Anita began to change in a dangerous way. She didn't explode, she withdrew. She kept everything inside, and that silence frightened those around her. Whether Anita could forgive betrayal remained a question mark, but one thing was certain: Anita could not forgive being treated innocently. And even if Vernon was innocent, Anita's suspicion was a wound. That wound didn't bleed loudly, but it poisoned every intimate moment. It made Anita look at Vernon and wonder, was she embracing a man she no longer understood? It made Anita see Sharon in her imagination as a ghost always standing at the edge of the bed. And it made Anita wonder the most terrifying thing: would she have the strength to fight cancer when her spirit was already being worn down by another battle? The story concludes in a suffocating circle of pressure, with everyone pushed to the brink in their own way. Vernon must choose between keeping the secret to protect his family or shattering it with the harsh truth to save Anita's trust. Sharon must choose between remaining silent to avoid revealing her secret or speaking out to free herself from the role of the third party, even if those words could shatter Vernon. Tracy must choose between stopping to avoid further pain or pushing forward to prove she's not wrong. Even if the further she goes, the more she becomes an enemy of the very person she claims to protect. Nicole must choose between believing her father or believing what she hears, between protecting her family's image or pulling them out of their illusion with a brutal confrontation. And at the center of it all, Anita, a woman suffering from a disease that could kill her. But what is killing her fastest is doubt. As winter descends upon Fairmont Crest, the coldest thing isn't the wind outside the gate, but the invisible distance growing between two people who once believed they had weathered every storm. The question is no longer simply whether Vernon is having an affair. The question now is, can they survive the suspicion, the secrets, the way those around them turn their pain into a power struggle, before the cancer is defeated or before their love is proven? And when Sharon is finally pushed to the point of speaking, no one knows whether she will choose to save Vernon or herself, because sometimes in Fairmont Crest, those two choices cannot coexist.